Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I want to talk to you about how to read Edison, specifically when you have it in the spectral view like this. You go into View and Spectrum, and you can see this kind of sound when you look at the recording. This has come from people who ask all the time, like when I look at Edison and I use this to kind of deduce what's going on in the sound, how you can do that and what that even means, that kind of thing. So first off, I want to first talk about how that this actually isn't the default configuration of how you look at Edison. I don't have a camera. It's a problem. I'm working on it. My bad. But this is not the default view. But let's look over the sort of the various ways that you can look at Edison. I almost call it Harmer. Not that far off, honestly. So in I guess it's in view and display settings. There's a whole bunch of settings for kind of how this works out. Over here we have waveform display, and then the different channels for like stereo and whatever, which only has to do with the waveform display, which is sort of the normal view of Edison when you look at it like this. But when we look at it in the spectrum, we get a bunch of different views. We get a bunch of different settings all over here. So over here is the resolution of it all, and I notice I don't have it on the maximum. It's not actually because I can't have it on the maximum. It's because it's not actually better if it's on the maximum. So this is what it looks like on the maximum. It's a little. Like, if I were to zoom in vertically, it would actually be a little bit better. You can actually tell that when I do it, it's kind of freaking out. This is actually a sound from my current track from scratch. The track from scratch. And I'm just using it as an example of something that's kind of complicated. We actually can't see a whole bunch of stuff that's happening because of the increased resolution of the bands, how many bands are showing up. 2048 is kind of okay, but I personally prefer the 1024, and that's just because I'm just used to it. I can see a lot better what's going on up here, and I really do mean up here because like as you go down, this other actually I should probably cover the weighting. So here's all the band resolution. Here's the weighting. I have it on natural scale, and there's a bunch of different options. So if I have natural weighting on, that's the level, right? So I got to tick off natural scale. I haven't been there in a while. So natural weighting is just about how bright certain frequencies are versus others, which gives it a more accurate look one way or the other. But then here's what it looks like with natural scale off. So this is similar to pretty much every kind of spectral analysis you'll ever see anywhere, where the difference, like for example in the equalizer, you can see that up here, here's the notes, right? These are octaves, C1, C2, C3. Notice that the octaves are evenly spaced, but then down here, frequency ranges are not. So 50 to 100 hertz is the same range as 5,000 to 10,000 hertz as it goes up higher. So the higher frequencies are denser in representation than the lower frequencies. And in this view mode, which I already forget which one it is, this is without natural scale on. So this is not accounting for scale. This is just accounting for frequency, which means that the frequencies are being evenly represented all the way up top. So the range that is 1,000 hertz up here is the range that is 1,000 hertz down here. And you can tell that most things are happening down here. So this is why the natural scale is the best way to see this kind of thing, because now this is displaying it in terms of octaves. So when we look at, if I zoom in right here, you can kind of see how there's a big bar here, a big bar here, a big bar here, and then it kind of gets smaller and smaller. These are actually the harmonics of the sound. This is the fundamental tone. Our first harmonic, second harmonic, or whatever. So like this range, these ranges are the octaves worth of harmonics, which are being evenly distributed and represented, and that sort of thing. You can also see it over here where the sound is moving, where it's going. This is what a change in pitch looks like, and that kind of thing. So the reason why I look at stuff like this is so that I can see what the frequency, the movement is, especially when there's moving sounds. I don't often need to see this kind of stuff for sounds that aren't, static or moving all that much. But when we look at what the motion is, we can see filter movement. And this is only one kind of spectral analysis. In fact, a more popular kind is one as seen on Voxenjo's span, or I think in the default, whatever the default is enabled in, and most other DAWs, honestly. And it's what's going on up here, actually, inside the visualizer. You can see kind of like the levels of represented individual harmonics, or frequencies rather, and then they're available, and you can see them moving around, and you can see how the act of the filtering upon them. Here you can see that too. It's just represented a bit differently. So like right here, for example, this sound has a whole bunch of bandpass filters, a whole bunch of notches, and it's compressed, it's distorted, all kinds of stuff is happening to it. And it would be really hard to determine that just from listening to the sound if you didn't know what that sounded like. But if you look at the sound like this, you can see evidence of that. For example, right here is a notch filter. This is a big hole in the spectrum that got moved around, and it got combobulated and discorded and moving around and whatever based on the other guys and reverb and that kind of stuff. But that's what that is. And when you see stuff like this, where it's kind of like you can see light here, and light there, this is a bandpass moving around. Or like right here, you can see a big notch kind of moving up in there, up and down through this. And this is actually another interesting phenomenon. When you see these vertical lines come in that are at the rate of the note, this is sort of like a saw wave's effect on things. A saw wave may look a bit more together in person, like if you were to put just a regular saw wave in here, but when you start to mess around with it, you can see lower bass notes start to essentially ring modulate the higher frequencies. So you see a big line of silence where there would be continuous sound otherwise. Almost like ring modulation. And sort of knowing that, if you look at this and determine, okay, cool, here's these frequencies are on, and then they're off, and then they're on, and then they're off. Even if you had no idea how the sound was made, and you can think to yourself, that's kind of like ring modulation, then you may wish to try to create this with ring modulation. See, looking at this is not so much about trying to find the truth in things. It's about trying to see how you yourself might be able to do it. Because if you knew how to do it, then you would just do it, obviously. And this is sort of what I refer to as brute force sound design, where you look at something like this and you think to yourself, okay, I have the slightest clue what process could possibly have made all this, but the movement is similar to something that I know I can do. So it's like, I'll just bandpass it and notch it and around and then low notes and then distort it because I know it's going to do that. Or maybe ring modulation on top of it, which is hard to do, but you can. And then maybe that'll make a similar sound. And it would make a similar sound. Obviously, it wouldn't sound exact, but that's how we are able to read sort of the process and the concept by looking at this kind of thing. And if you're listening to this and you're just completely lost, you come here and be like, okay, I know that this sound was accomplished with pitch motion, which you might be thinking, well, by listening to it, but honestly, this stuff isn't that obvious to someone who's new to sound design. In fact, I very specifically remember being bewildered by exactly this kind of sound when I first started producing, and only until somewhat recently was this something even I was able to do just because of my own knowledge. But in the beginning, it was just as mysterious as anything else might be. But looking at this is a pretty reasonable resource. So understanding sort of what frequency has what value at what time and for how long or whatever, it has to do with reading this, but it also has to do with reading an EQ. I got real used to FL's EQ over the years, and one thing that I like about it is that it has the same style of spectral view as Edison does. And I don't know if that Edison existed when this existed. Point being is that I got really used to this before I got used to Edison. So you're not looking at really a map of the motion so much as you're a live view of the motion. And it's a very different way of looking at it. And while it shows you more or less the same information, you can get different kinds of clues out of it. Because now it's allowed you to see things like the harmonics, for example. You can see clear delineation of individual harmonic position, which can lead you to, what kind of waveform it is. I'm always looking at things and I'm looking at it and being like, okay, is it a saw wave or a square wave? You might be thinking, well, this isn't even close to either of those waveforms. Like, this is not saw or square at all. And you'd be right about that in the terms of the literal shape of the waveform wouldn't be a saw wave or a square wave. But the harmonic content is. The harmonic content of a saw wave and a square wave can be attributed to pretty much anything. It's just the series, the harmonic series. It's just what it is. So if you look at a saw wave series is going to be just the regular series, and then the square wave series is going to have half that. It's going to have every other harmonic as opposed to every harmonic. And you can very clearly see that difference when you look at something like this. This sound actually originally was a square wave based sound, but now it's a saw wave based sound. You can tell by the harmonic movement, but you can also tell by the sharpness of it. Like, that kind of sharpness comes from it being harmonically a saw based, the series of saw harmonics, that kind of thing. And then that also it's a little bit easier to see that when it's in motion. Provided you can see the whole thing. And this is only so helpful in a lot of ways. It's also pretty helpful when you're looking at it while you hear it sound. So you look at something like this, and now you're basically training your mind to accept that this sound is what this image represents. And so then when you hear it, you can see it later. It's the whole idea here, especially about learning sound design in general, is that you experiment yourself. You do some things. You see what they look like. You see what the analysis is like. And then when you hear it and see it in other stuff, you know how to do that because you've done it before. There's really no other way to do that. I'm basically just describing what experience is. And there's an inference you can make on some things, but it's still just based on your experience of how things worked before. And then you do that enough times, eventually you build your own internal library of how things work, and it's basically just describing psychology and like the psychology of how humans learn things. This is how that works. So like I'm using one of my own sounds here, and it's sort of interesting just because I don't typically do that, but the value of this is that if you learn, especially if you like, because again, I grew up quote unquote with this equalizer. So whenever I made any sound, I would always look at the EQ to see what that motion created, like what motion in the harmonics represented whatever sound I was doing, which meant that when later I would hear sounds, look at through the EQ or look at it through Edison, I would recognize things that look familiar. And there's also other like sort of empirical evidence of some things, even if you have no idea what it is. Like over here, I'm looking at this as being like amplitude modulation because the amplitude is modulating. That's you can just make that assumption about that. And then similarly, like if you looked at frequency modulation, so this is like an FM sound, you would look at a sound and you would see it moving up and down. Like if you see the frequencies moving up and down really, really fast because it's just FM. In fact, I did that in my oldest research of like original Skrillex sounds and looking at like specifically the Scary Monsters Nice Sprites main bass, not the vocoded basses, not the effect basses, but the actual wah 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 wah. And like that sound eluded me for a while, and I haven't tried in a while, but I don't think I'd probably nail it. But if you looked at it inside the spectrum, you'd see little wavy lines because it's FM. And like if that for some reason, if you didn't understand what FM sounded like, you can look at this and see, oh, the frequency is moving, it's being modulated, and that's sort of what Edison's all about. Well, looking at it like this anyway, this particular kind of spectrograph imaging analysis, what have you, and that sort of thing. And it's also like, these days anyway, the majority of my analysis is not being done visually. I can infer a lot of things, but it's mostly just like, I think this is what's happening. I'm looking at Edison, okay, that's exactly what's happening. This is kind of verifying what I'm already looking at. And not necessarily actually using this to get new information, but to confirm what I already know, and just kind of using this as a platform to ponder, how I'm going to go about doing it, and that kind of thing. If someone ever got the idea that like I went into a sound completely dry with having zero idea how to do it, and they came in here and solved that by sort of assessing what it's doing, it doesn't really happen. I usually have some idea what I'm doing anyway, and then it just comes in here to confirm it, which may or may not elicit confirmation bias, but that's that's life. That's life for you. I do recommend that you kind of use the EQ, at least in FL and Edison, kind of in tandem. So you can get kind of like a map of what's going on and like a live sort of motion view of what's going on. And the two things together will get you a lot of complete information. What else? That's more or less it. Yeah, so that's a good look into sort of how I utilize Edison. But it's also important to note that there are other ways to look at stuff I'm not particularly a fan of. Like in the recent release of FL12, we have two different modes now. We have enhanced frequency, which gets us this, which on the first look, you might be thinking, oh my God, that's awesome. Like the first time I saw this, I was like, dude, I can see the harmonics so clearly, but like only from really far out. Because if I zoom in, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. I don't like this, what? Like, I don't care if that's actually what's happening. I can't assess like harmonics anymore. I can kind of see where some of them are, but like, I come in here, like, I don't know where the harmonics are anymore. They're so just a mess now that it's just like not happening. But for the most part, the same information is there. And there's also enhanced time. It's a little bit better. But enhanced time can also be used outside of enhanced frequency. Like so. And sometimes this is neat, but other times it's not quite as helpful. And it's really up to you about like what kind of like scale and setting and band count and whatever it will work for you. But like I'm just particularly used to this particular setting. and I'm able to look at it and understand what I'm looking at, without much trouble. Yeah, so if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and all that good stuff, and as usual, have a nice day.